Hello, my name is Todd Carr. I am a local historian here in Hardin County, Illinois, and I'm here to talk to you today about the Illinois Iron Furnace and early mining in the Shawnee National Forest. We're here at the Illinois Iron Furnace site. It's a Shawnee National Forest site here just a few miles outside of Elizabethtown, Illinois. When settlers began arriving in Illinois in the early 1800s, one of the things that they did is not try to bring anything with them that they couldn't acquire here after they got here, because they were coming either downriver on flatboats and canoes, or they were coming overland with horses and wagons on roads that aren't like the roads that we have today. They were just trails through the woods, basically. And so anything that you could acquire after you got here, it was more advantageous for the settlers not to bring it with them. And that's why we see the salt springs in Gallatin County north of here were important, because they could obtain salt from those salt springs and they didn't have to bring salt with them. Another thing is they could acquire iron after they got here and not bring heavy iron implements with them, thinking about how heavy a plow would be to bring in a horse and a wagon this far into the interior of the United States. So one of the things that they did is they built an iron furnace here in Illinois. It was started in 1837, and by 1839 they were actually smelting iron here in Illinois. And the Illinois Iron Furnace here is the only place in Illinois that iron was ever smelted. And it was started in 1839, and periodically they smelted iron and made iron here until the 1880s. The iron furnace is built into the side of a hill like you see here, because all of the ingredients that go into making iron were loaded in the top of the furnace, so they were stored in stockpiles on the hill behind the furnace until they were ready to use, and then they would use a ramp or a bridge to take them to the top of the furnace and dump all the ingredients in the top of the furnace. The opening in the bottom of the furnace that you see is where the iron, after it was smelted in the furnace, would come out as molten iron, and then all the waste products, the slag, would also come out of that way through those tunnels in the bottom of the furnace. So the way the furnace is built, there is an interior core of fire brick that was the actual the furnace itself, and then the rock that you see was basically just holding and insulating that furnace, that blast furnace in the middle. There would have also been a billows here that would force air into the furnace, making the furnace hotter, so it would get up to the temperature that it would actually melt the iron down into a liquid state. When they first built the furnace in the 1830s, they used the nearby Big Creek. They dammed it up and made enough water back behind that dam that they used a water wheel to operate those billows to force the air in. They realized that the creek would run dry in the summertime, and that wasn't the best way to do it, so they brought in a steam engine, and later they used a steam engine to drive that billows so that they could force air into the furnace. It takes 3 ingredients in order to make iron. You have to have charcoal, which they made themselves by cutting the trees down around the area here and stacking them into piles, catching the trees on fire, the limbs on fire, and then after the limbs were on fire, then they would put dirt over the top of it, smoldering it and letting it just sit there and smolder and make like a black charcoal, much like the charcoal that we use today in charcoal grills. The other ingredient that you needed was limestone. They put limestone in there to act as a flux and to gather all of the slag material together. That limestone would help attract that out of the iron ore. So the limestone was added to bring all the slag or the waste products together. The third ingredient you needed was iron ore, and the iron ore was found in the hills around here, and it was in the form of a rock that we called limonite, and they would mine that limonite out of these hills, and so all of these ingredients would be gathered on that hill behind the furnace until they were ready to make a batch of iron. And the way they did it is they had a recipe of iron, limestone, and charcoal that they would layer in the furnace, catch it on fire, start their billows forcing air in, and then once all of the ingredients were in the furnace, they had to smelt those ingredients for 12 hours in the furnace, letting the iron liquefy and gather in the bottom of the furnace. And as the iron went to the bottom, the rest of the products, the waste products, would all gather together and they would sit on top of the furnace. And when all was ready, they would break out a clay plug in the bottom of the furnace and let the liquid iron flow out of the bottom. So after all the ingredients had been placed in the furnace, the charcoal, the limestone, and the limonite had all been added to the top of the furnace, it would sit in the furnace and cook for 12 hours. And at the end of the 12 hours, it was ready to tap the furnace and let all the molten iron out. Well, one of the issues that you have, especially in the 1800s, is how do you contain molten iron and mold it into something that's transportable? And so what they would do is down in this area in the bottom, they made a whole field of sand, a sand pit down here. And they would fill this area with sand, and then they would take and make a trough down the middle of the sand that the iron, when it was tapped at the bottom of the furnace, would flow out into that sand pit and flow down that trough. And there was one major trough down the middle and then little side troughs off to the side that all the molten iron could run into and then cool and then be broken up and transported other places. The middle trough that they made was called a sow, and then all of the little side troughs off of the side of that sow were called pigs because it was similar to a piglets on a mother sow. And so that's where we get the term pig iron today. When you hear pig iron was smelted at the iron furnace, the reason it was called pigs is because of the layout that they did when they were making the iron into transportable pieces. And so after the 12 hours and everything was ready, the sand pit had been laid out, they had their forms made into the troughs made into the sand pit. They would go in and there would be a clay plug in the bottom of the furnace that they would knock out, and when they knocked out that clay plug, all of the molten iron would come down that middle sow trough and then into the little side troughs, and that's how they collected the iron after it was smelted in the furnace. After all of the iron came out, all of the waste products would come out, and all the waste products would form into a rock that was called slag. All right, here we have the ingredients that went into making the iron in the furnace. Again, they made their own charcoal. This is charcoal like we would use in our local grills at home, but they would make their own charcoal. This is just charred wood. They also needed a source of limestone, just like the limestone rocks that we see in all the gravel roads in our area. They use that same limestone in making the iron. And then the source of the iron ore was a rock called limonite. And this is a piece of limonite, and this came from one of the mining pits at the Illinois Iron Furnace right across the creek and across the bridge from where the Illinois Iron Furnace sits today. This came out of one of the same mining pits that they were mining the limonite in the 1800s to make the iron ore. And you can see in the limonite that there's some dark rusty patches. That's the iron in that rock. And that's what is being smelted out in the furnace or heated up in the furnace so that this iron liquefies and all goes to the bottom of the furnace. All of the waste products that aren't iron all fuse together. So the rest of the limonite, the rest of the limestone, any debris from the charcoal that's left behind all fuses together into a rock called slag. And this is a piece of slag. And again, this was picked up out at the iron furnace. And this was just waste product from making the iron. And it's all over the place on the ground and in the creek here at the Illinois Iron Furnace. I mentioned that when the iron came out of the bottom of the furnace, they would make a sand pit in order to collect the liquefied iron. Well, when that liquefied iron hit the sand, it caused the sand to melt and fuse. Well, melted sand is where we get glass. And so this is a piece of black glass that's left over from the iron process of where the iron cooled down. And you can see in this piece of glass, there's a smooth piece in the glass where this piece of black glass used to be next to an iron bar, one of those iron pigs when it came out of the furnace, and you can see where it sat here, and then this was surrounding it. Again, there's pieces of this black glass all over the place here at the iron furnace. And then finally, here is a piece of pig iron that was smelted at the Illinois Iron Furnace in the 1800s. This pig iron is 50 pounds, and this is how they made the iron transportable. and they would take these iron pigs and stack them into the back of carts and use oxen and pull these ox carts to Elizabethtown, to the riverfront, which is only about 4 or 5 miles away. And at Elizabethtown's riverfront, they could load it onto different vessels and transport it down the river to areas where they could manufacture things with the iron. And again, a local blacksmith could take one of these pig irons and use his forge and make iron horseshoes for the horses that are here. They could make instruments for the using in the house, like a skillet or a kettle and pot for a pioneer here. They could use it to make shovels and hoes, you know, in order to use around their gardens. They could make axes with the iron, and then even bigger implements like a plow blade that they could pull behind their pack animals so that they could plow up a field in order to plant. So all of these uses came from this pig iron, and they were able to acquire it here in Illinois after the settlers were coming into Illinois. They were able to acquire their iron here and not transport it, which was a whole lot more convenient. So at this kiosk at the Illinois Iron Furnace, we see a display here showing how all of the components came together in order to make iron. You see the shed and the ramp that leads to the top of the furnace where all the ingredients were poured in the top of the furnace. Inside of the furnace is the actual blast chamber where all the ingredients heated up over that 12-hour period of time till the molten iron is all in the bottom of the furnace. You see a water wheel over here and billows that were forcing air into the furnace in order to make the furnace hot enough to melt the iron out of the limonite. And then finally, when the liquid iron came out of the bottom of the furnace, you see the sand pit over here where the molds were made into the sand of the pig iron and the sow going down the middle. And again, it gets its name because it's similar to piglets suckling off a sow. So the Illinois Iron Furnace was used throughout the 1800s. During the Civil War, though, there was not any iron produced at the furnace because it was a very labor-intensive process, and most of the men had gone to the fight in the Civil War. But after the Civil War, they smelted iron here on and off until the 1880s. At one time, there was an entire village around the iron furnace site here where people were living. And in the 1900s, it got into disrepair. During the 1930s, when the CCC were doing road improvements in Hardin County, they actually used dynamite and blasted rock out of the top of the furnace and used the rock to make the abutment for the nearby Big Creek Bridge that goes over Big Creek adjacent to the site. And then when the Shawnee National Forest was acquiring property, they acquired this property, and in 1967 the Golconda Job Corps came out and rebuilt the furnace as it looked in the 1800s, and that's the furnace that you see today. And if you come out here today, this is a picnic site. There's a shelter here. There is a swimming hole over in Big Creek that is popular in the summertime. And so you can come out and see the Illinois Iron Furnace, but you can also have a picnic and go swimming in the old swimming hole.